All right, guys, we're back. This time we're going to be talking about carbohydrates specifically. If you haven't seen the first video that I made, please be sure to watch that. One, so you just get a general idea of the basics, and two, you kind of understand where I'm trying to go with this. I said in the first part that I'd be making like 3 separate videos on each of the macronutrients in the series as it goes on. Today's going to be about carbs, the next one will be about fat, and the next one will be about protein. Again, carbs, fats, and proteins are the macronutrients, macro meaning major, so they're the major nutrients that make up our food, and they're the three nutrients where all of our energy comes from where all of our calories come from. So today we're going to be talking about carbs specifically. So let's just jump right into it. First of all, I want to address this about carbs because you see a lot of people trying to lose weight and they automatically like blame carbs and they blame I need to cut back my carbs, I need to stop eating bread, this, that, whatever, to try and lose weight, and there's absolutely zero correlation between carbohydrate intake and body fat. Generally, what these people mean by they need to cut back on their carbs is it's not the carbohydrates that is making them fat, it's the food that they're eating that is so dense in carbohydrates, like pizza, like cake, like brownies, like ice cream. Like those are all high in carbs, and that's what's making you fat because they're also very high in fat, and in general, they're just very high in calories. But the carbohydrates themselves, the molecular structure of the carbohydrate, is doing absolutely nothing to contribute to your body fat gain. Um, so let's just jump right into carbohydrates. If you look at the molecular structure of a gram of carbohydrate, carbohydrates are going to be made up of various, I would say, various collections or various combinations of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And every single gram of carbohydrate, you're going to have a 2-to-1 ratio of hydrogen to oxygen. So there's always going to be 2 times as much hydrogen as there is an oxygen in a carbohydrate molecule. Real quick, because I bet by this point in the video, you guys are like, "Are you shitting me? We're learning about chemistry." If I wanted to learn about chemistry, I'd take my high school chemistry class or a college chemistry class or something like that. Um, but trust me, understanding the molecular structure of all 3 of these macronutrients is really important to understanding how they work and how they function in the body. Not necessarily carbohydrates so much, but definitely fat and definitely protein. It's very important to understand the molecular structure of these 3 macronutrients so you can understand how to utilize them and how your body uses them in everyday activity. So the main thing with the molecular structure of carbohydrates is depending on the various combinations of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, the carbohydrate is going to be made up of one of 3 things. It's either going to be a sugar, something like Gatorade, candy, um, fruit. So it's going to be a sugar, what one would commonly constitute as a sugar. You're going to have a starch, which is going to be things like rice, potatoes, um, breads, oatmeals, etc. And then you're also going to have fibers, and that's what's going to be what your vegetables, more likely your green vegetables, but like your reds and your yellows and your peppers and onions and all that stuff. Those are technically carbohydrates, but their molecular alignment makes them a fiber instead of a sugar or a starch. So that's important to remember that carbs can be one of 3 things. They can be a sugar, they can be a starch, and they can be a fiber. All 3 of these forms of carbohydrates, sugars, starches, fibers, they are also all broken down into one of 3 simple carbohydrate monosaccharides. What monosaccharide means is simple sugar. So whether you're eating a sugar, a starch, or a fiber, it can get broken into one of 3 things. It can be broken into glucose, it can be broken into fructose, or it can be broken into galactose. I'm going to get into each one of those 3 in a second here specifically, kind of give some examples of each. and kind of explain so you guys have a general idea of exactly what I'm talking about. Hopefully you guys aren't too lost by now. Go back and rewatch that part if you have to kind of get what I'm saying here. So as we get into glucose, glucose is going to be the major energy source for your body and your brain. When you go through everything, everyday activities, walking around at work, walking from the bed to the kitchen, doing exercise, what you're using to fuel that energy, aside from ATP, what you're using is you're using glucose. So you can start to see real quick right here that carbohydrates are pretty important for daily energy, and just kind of going through the daily basis of everyday life. Carbohydrates can also be broken down into fructose. Now, what fructose is it's fruit sugar. So obviously, the only carbohydrates that are going to contain fructose is going to be fruit. Bananas, apples, oranges, you guys know what fruit is. But eating fruit, when the body digests a fruit, it's completely digested fully into fructose. And what fructose is really good for is fructose is really good for replenishing the liver. Every organ in your body seems to run off of glucose with the exception of the liver. For whatever reason, fructose is very easily absorbed by the liver. And so it's important to include fruit into your daily diet in moderation. I'll get into like specifically when I would include fruit in a diet here in a little bit. But it's good for replenishing the glycogen in your liver. And the liver is probably the most important fat burning organ in your body. The liver is important. It's where most of the synthesis and uptake of amino acids happen. So all the protein you're eating to fuel those muscles, right, it's going into and it's being synthesized by the liver. So you want to eat enough fruit to give the liver its energy source, right? This fructose. And the final form of monosaccharide that a carbohydrate could be digested as is called galactose. And what galactose is you can kind of tell by the name. Galactose is its milk sugar. It's the carbohydrates that you're going to find in dairy products like yogurt, cream cheese, cheese in general, milk. If you look at all of those things, most of those things, the exception of some cheeses, they all do contain carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates that's going to be in your milk, in your yogurt, in your Greek yogurt, in your cottage cheese, it's going to come and be digested as galactose in the body and its final stages of digestion. People that are lactose intolerant have a real hard issue digesting galactose sugar. Their body, the enzyme for digesting lactose and lactase, it doesn't turn on and it doesn't functionally digest dairy products, specifically the sugar in the dairy products, and that's why they have such a hard issue with stomach issues and stuff when they eat dairy products, is because they literally physically cannot digest it. Their body doesn't have the enzyme that's necessary to digest galactose. Most of us aren't that unlucky. We can enjoy things like ice cream and everything, and it's no issue. But the people that are lactose intolerant, they cannot digest the milk sugar, the galactose that's in the dairy. So now that we know the major forms of carbohydrates and what they can be digested into and everything, it's important to know, going back to the liver, as I was saying with the fructose, that after you eat your carbohydrates, they're sent to the liver, and what the liver will do is it'll keep the glucose that it needs for its form of energy, and then what it will do is it will take the rest of the glucose, the fructose, the galactose that it's digested, and it's going to ship it into the body. And during the process of shipping it into the body, everything, even fructose, even galactose, is converted into glucose. So every single gram of carbohydrate that you consume, whether it is fructose, whether it's galactose, eventually will be changed into glucose in the body. It's just that turnover ratio that's an issue. And what this means is that the body constantly has glucose moving through it because of the liver. What this is known as is this is what your blood sugar is. Again, as I was saying, that glucose, all carbohydrates in the end are digested as glucose, which is a monosaccharide. Monosaccharide meaning simple sugar. This is what your blood sugar is it's the consistent amount of glucose that's constantly circulating through your body. It's important to realize that your body likes to keep this amount of blood sugar very consistent and ideal. It doesn't like to have massive spikes and then massive drops of blood sugar. It kind of messes up with the homeostasis and the metabolic processes that happen within the body. So it is important for me as a coach when I'm constructing a diet, specifically for athletes, is that I'm keeping their blood sugar levels constant and consistent. Because what you'll find with blood sugar rises and crashes is massive spikes of energy and then massive dips of energy. Obviously, if I'm working with somebody who their gym performance or their athletic performance is the number one priority, I don't want them constantly having highs and lows in their energy source. So basing the diet around keeping carbohydrates and blood sugar in general consistent is what I highly recommend for all my clients. And you guys at home, when you're consisting and developing your diet, is try and keep your blood sugar levels constant. You're going to feel much, much better. I'm going to get into how to do this in a second, obviously. But just keep the body's glucose stream going by eating carbohydrates consistently, especially if you're a performance athlete or a physique athlete or a strength athlete. This is extremely important. The amount of blood sugar that's usually revolving around the body is around 20 grams of glucose per hour. So over the course of every hour, you're getting about 20 grams of glucose that circulates through the bloodstream as your blood sugar. If the blood sugar happens to drop below this usual consistent 20 grams per hour, the glucose that has been stored in your liver will be released from the liver and used to stabilize the blood sugar. So that's why keeping your liver in healthy and full of glucose through eating fruit is important, specifically in athletic performance and physique athletes. So it is important to keep the liver filled up. Speaking of that, the liver can hold around 80 to 100 grams of glucose before it's full. To give you guys a rough estimate, the average banana is anywhere from 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrates. So what that means to me as a coach and what it should mean to you guys as the athlete is I would keep the total amount of carbs that you consume through fruit to be maximum 80 to 100 grams. If you're consuming like 150, 200 grams of fructose through fruit on a daily basis, you're better off taking some of those carbohydrates that you're taking through fruit. So you're taking in 150 grams of carbohydrates through fruit. I'd reduce that to somewhere around 80 to 100 and take the remaining 50 to 70 and shift that to a starch like rice or potatoes or something. You're going to feel better. Your blood sugar will be better. Your liver won't be cranking in overdrive constantly, which is going to keep it healthier longer. And that's going to be the most optimal way to go. The amount of glucose that your muscles can hold, because this is something that's really popular with bodybuilders and physique athletes, is the amount of glucose that their muscles currently hold in the motor units and in the muscle tissue itself. That's going to be called glycogen, by the way. So if I reference glycogen, that's what I mean, is the amount of carbohydrates that your muscles are storing. Those can store anywhere from 300 to 600 grams of glucose. Obviously, the total amount of glucose that your muscles can store is going to depend on the size of the muscle. For the elite IFBB open, level bodybuilders, these guys are 320 pounds in the off season. These guys are massive nowadays. These guys' muscles can probably hold 1,000 to 1,200 grams of carbohydrates. You look at some of the world's strongest men, Brian Shaw, Hathor Bjornsson, hope I didn't butcher his name there. These guys are massive, 400-pound strength athletes, and these guys are strong as an ox. These guys' muscles can hold more than the 300 to 600 grams of muscle glycogen range, which is why when you see the videos and everything of these guys eating, they're eating 1,000 to 1,200 grams of carbohydrates a day. They're just shoveling rice and potatoes in their mouth every hour. It's because their muscles can hold it. Now, if we were doing that as normal people, we're probably going to get fat just because we're going to be consuming a large amount of calories by eating 1,200 grams of carbs a day. But we're also probably going to be miserable because our muscles aren't adapted to holding that high amount of glucose. As I said in the first video on the basics of carbohydrates and just the basics of nutrition in general, carbohydrates contain 4 calories per gram, which is going to be important to setting up the diet and figuring out the diet when we get to that point in the last video. So now that we kind of have a general idea of carbohydrates, what they're set up, what they can be digested as, and kind of how they're constantly flowing through the body, the last part that I want to talk about specifically is carbohydrates and how they're absorbed into the muscle cells. What happens when you eat carbohydrates? Eventually, again, they're digested into sugar. When they're digested as sugar, that signals the pancreas to release insulin. Hopefully you guys are familiar with insulin, especially as rampant as diabetes is in today's society. You're proficient in insulin and you understand what insulin means. What insulin does is it allows the muscle cells and it allows the fat cells to open up. So if you have a fat cell and it's, let's just say for an easy way to understand, a muscle cell is round. It's like a ball, right? And you've got the glucose and the amino acids from your protein is like circling throughout in the bloodstream. When the pancreas releases insulin, it allows that muscle cell to open up and take in the carbohydrates and the glucose and the amino acids into the muscle cell. That is why eating carbohydrates is extremely important for repairing muscle cells, recovering from workouts, and things of that sort, is because by eating carbs, you're secreting insulin, and insulin is what takes in the carbs and the amino acids from your food, and that's what's going to help you recover and grow ultimately. So understanding that if there's any meal that you should probably have carbohydrates in, it's probably the post-workout meal. After the time where the muscles are sore, they're broken down, those muscle cells, they need to be filled with amino acids and glucose. So by eating carbohydrates in your post-workout meal, obviously when I get to talking about prioritizing an athlete's diet in the last video, I'm going to be talking about like eating, you're probably going to be eating carbs in every single meal. But if there's one meal that you got to have carbohydrates in, it really should be the post-workout meal. For you guys out there who are on like low carb diet, so you're prepping for a show and you're getting 50 grams of carbs a day. If it were me, I would probably do 25 grams of carbs pre-workout and then 25 grams of carbs post-workout. I would do some carbs pre-workout to give you energy to fuel the workout, and then I'd give you some carbs post-workout to help you recover, fill the muscles back up with glycogen and amino acids through signaling insulin. So now that we kind of know a bit more about carbohydrates now, I want to talk about how dietary carbohydrates specifically and how they work in the body and how you should be thinking about these carbohydrates. So for all you low carb advocates out there, what you need to understand is glucose is essential to life. This glucose is important for brain and the central nervous system as their primary source of fuel. So for all you people out there that think that carbohydrates are what's making you fat, you're completely wrong. Carbohydrates are what allows your body to flourish. It's your body and your central nervous systems. Thinking when the central nervous system, we're talking like your brain here. It's number one energy source. That's why you see a lot of people in bodybuilding shows when they prep and they're going multiple days without carbs, they do stupid shit. Because literally their brain does not have any energy to function. I know an athlete, a guy that I talked to, that he got home from his workout one night. He was in prep. He hadn't eaten carbs in 4 days. And he was using his car key in his house to try and unlock his house for like 20 minutes. And it wouldn't work. And he was getting all pissed off, throwing shit. He didn't know what was going on. His brain literally did not have any energy for him to be able to make a good cognitive decision that the car key is probably not going to fit in the house key slot. So for all you low carb people out there, I really suggest that you look somewhere else, because taking away your carbohydrates is a very good way to making you feel like shit and do stupid stuff very quickly. Anyone who's transitioned from a decent amount of carbs to a keto diet or a low carb diet can vouch for that. That low carbs suck. It's often called the low carb blues in the bodybuilding industry. You're pretty sad, and life kind of sucks when you don't have any carbohydrates. Now, it is important to know for the keto advocates out there that if the carb consumption is low, your body can shift to ketones for fuel instead of using glucose. Um, Ketones are essentially you're using your body fat as fuel. That is that is possible. I just don't recommend that you guys do keto for the simple reason that you can make your body work off of ketones, but why would you try and fight your body and fight what your body is trying to use as fuel? Why are you trying to go against the body by using something else as fuel that the body doesn't want to use as fuel? It wants to use glucose as fuel. So why are you trying to fight your natural metabolic processes? Um, it is something that's in the back pocket if, say, you're behind for a bodybuilding show and you've got like 3 weeks and you got a lot of weight to lose. Keto may be the way to go. I'm a big advocate of keto for people who are like drastically overweight, like 350, 400 pound, like chronically obese Americans. I think that keto is a good way to go. It's a good way to have like rapid fat loss. But for prioritizing an athlete's diet, carbohydrates are definitely there, and they're there in abundance. The liver can also produce the bare minimum amount of glucose that the body needs for survival, which it undergoes that through a process called gluconeogenesis. And what gluconeogenesis means is it takes outside sources other than glucose, and it catabolizes them, or it destroys them and forms them into glucose. This is really common and really popularly perceived as the body destroying muscle tissue to convert the amino acids into glucose, which can happen. It is important to understand that if your carbs get too low, you do run the risk of gluconeogenesis happening and your body catabolizing and destroying your muscle tissue to use as fuel, especially if you're supremely lean. Like if you're 2 weeks out of a show and you're 5% body fat and you're not eating any carbs and you're still training, your body has no fat to use as energy, and your body has no glucose to use as energy, so you do run a fairly high risk, what I believe is a fairly high risk of gluconeogenesis catabolizing your muscle tissue. Again, fighting against all the low carb people. You'll know if you work with me that I'm not a fan of low carbs. I think it makes life crappy, and I think it just kind of sets the body up for a whole lot of negative doing. Not a whole lot of positive things come out of the gym and gym performance when your carbohydrates are low. People ask me all the time, how many grams of carbs should I be consuming? You know, I've heard 3 grams of carbs per pound of body weight, 2.5 grams of carbs per every kilogram of whatever. I've heard a bunch of different things about how many carbohydrates you should be taking in a day. Ultimately, the total carbohydrate intake is going to be based off of your body composition, whether you're fat or lean, and it's going to be based off your athletic demands. If you're somebody who, say, is a sprinter, you know, if you look at some of these elite level sprinters, these guys are ripped to death. They have like no body fat, and their workouts are unbelievably intense. These guys need massive amounts of carbohydrates. Look at Michael Phelps. I know everybody's seen and heard that video of Michael Phelps eating 12,000 calories a day and eating all these pizzas and sandwiches and all this other crap. But that's because he is busting his ass for 5-6 hours a day working out. He needs these carbohydrates to fuel those intense workout sessions. And bodybuilders and strength athletes are no different. I'm kind of stealing this line from Stan Efferding, but it's really funny how when Michael Phelps came out and said that he eats 12,000 calories a day, everyone kind of freaked out. But if a bodybuilder, or nobody really freaked out, I should say, but if like a bodybuilder, like, or a strength power lifter were to come out and say that they eat 12,000 calories a day, everyone freaks out and says, "Oh, you're going to be fat and you're going to be unhealthy." And the truth is these guys have insanely um, large demands on their body through their training routines, and they need those carbohydrates um, to fuel their athletic demands. So if you're someone who's like that and you train extremely hard, you will need more carbohydrates from someone who just kind of goes through the motions in the gym. What kind of carbohydrates should we be consuming? Hopefully everyone's familiar with the glycemic index and just generally the difference between like a refined carbohydrate and an unrefined carbohydrate. Um, Examples of refined carbohydrates are things that are bleached, basically like white bread, white pasta, cookies, candy, things that are processed. These things they're refined, they're altered. By taking in these kind of carbohydrates, you're going to get a higher spike in blood sugar. They do have a tendency for raising your LDL, which is what we call your bad cholesterol. Um, and so you're probably thinking, oh, refined carbohydrates they're probably terrible, right? I do think that they have a purpose in a diet. If you're a physique athlete or a strength athlete, if you're in the gym busting your ass, I think that there is a time where you should be consuming refined carbohydrates. I'll get into that in a second here. But if you're just like a normal everyday person trying to lose weight, you need to completely eliminate refined carbohydrates from your diet. They're not good for your health. They're not good for your body composition. They're they're cheap is essentially why people buy them. White bread's pretty cheap, candy's cheap, cookies cheap, it tastes good. But just because it tastes good, it's kind of slowly killing you. In my personal opinion, I don't really want to get into my personal opinions too much. I just kind of want to make this like pretty anecdotal. But I don't really want to talk about my personal opinions too much. But I do think that refined carbohydrates don't have a place in an everyday person's diet. In an athlete's diet, they do. I'll get into that in a second. The opposite of refined carbohydrates are going to be unrefined carbohydrates. And these are things like rice, oatmeal, whole grains, sweet potatoes, natural things, like things that naturally occur. That they're not bleached, they're not altered in any way. They're taken from the garden, or they're taken from the rice field, or they're taken from the field, and they're put in on the shelf for you to buy. What these do is they lead to higher fiber intake, which is important for digestion and assimilating all the food that you're eating so that you can digest it and utilize it properly. You're going to get more stable blood sugar by eating unrefined carbohydrates. Remember, that's a major factor that I was talking about when I structure an athlete's diet, is keeping their blood sugar um, consistent. And you're also going to get better control of your blood sugar. When it does spike, it doesn't spike as high, and when it does dip, it doesn't dip as low. So instead of getting these crazy high spikes and lows, you're just kind of getting like a wave pattern is how I would describe it to people. So now that you have all this overwhelming knowledge and everything of carbohydrates, what really matters and what you're probably asking me is what carbs should I be eating or should I be eating and using in a daily basis. If you know me personally, if I've talked to you about nutritional stuff before, you know that I'm a massive, 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 massive fan of rice. Rice and rice products. By rice products, I mean things that are made with rice, like cream of rice, for example, rice cakes, Rice Krispies cereal, Rice Krispies treats, things that are made with rice. They're incredibly easy to digest. Cream of rice is what's generally given to babies as the baby's first food that they can eat, their first whole food. A lot of baby formulas are made with rice because a baby's digestive tract is so delicate that it needs very delicate foods that can be digested by the baby's delicate um, gastrointestinal tract. Um, so when you're an athlete like me who's trying to eat 600 grams of carbs a day, I want to be eating the majority of those carbs from rice because it's very easy to eat, especially in large amounts. It doesn't sit in your gut. It's important to realize that a lot of these strength and physique athletes are eating literally every 2 hours, if not 3 hours. So they're eating anywhere from every 2 to 3 hours. So they cannot be eating things that sit in their stomach and make them feel full. Because if they eat a meal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and their next meal comes around at 4:30 in the afternoon and they're still full from the meal before that, that's going to impair their ability to eat that next meal. Being able to eat a meal, digest it, and then get on to the next meal is the number one important thing when you're trying to consume large amounts of food on a daily basis. And because of rice's um, easy to digest features, it's so cheap. You can buy 5 to 10 pound bags of rice for like $10 at the store. It's so cheap and it'll last forever. It's easy to cook. You can buy a rice cooker and make like 10 cups of rice in like a half hour. It's and just keep it plugged in and you can scoop it out of the rice cooker warm. Rice, in my opinion, is by far the king of carbohydrates. Um, I get asked a lot, what's the difference between the types of rice? What's the difference between white rice? What's the difference between jasmine rice? What's the difference between basmati rice? What about brown rice? I get asked a lot about these different kinds of rices. Um, to be 100% honest, there is no difference between any of the four. What you have to find is the kind that you think tastes the best and digests the best with you. People will say that rice is more of a whole grain. If you look at the glycemic index between white rice and brown rice, it's very, very similar. Um, and if you look at the vitamin and nutrient content in white rice and brown rice technically has more vitamins in it, but it's by so little that it's not even really relevant. Um, so if you're eating brown rice because you hear that it's better for you than white rice and you hate it and you're just kind of forcing it down every day, stop eating that shit. I personally like jasmine rice. Jasmine rice is going to be the rice that you get when you go to like a Chinese or an Asian um, restaurant. Basmati rice is going to be the kind of rice that you get when you get Indian food. Not a lot of people, especially where I'm from, have really ever eaten Indian food. Um, but it's if you have eaten Indian food, it's the kind of rice that comes with Indian food. Um, Again, just reiterating, I'm a big fan of jasmine rice. A lot of my clients are. A lot of the bodybuilders stuff that I know are big fans of jasmine rice. It's cheap, very easy to eat, very easy to digest, super easy to cook. It's the king of carbs in my opinion. Right behind rice is potatoes. Potatoes are very easy to digest as well. They're also very cheap. The main difference between rice and potatoes is going to be rice seems to be a little less satiating, means that you're not that full for when you eat rice. But for me personally, when I eat potatoes, I'm a lot more full. Like they sit in my stomach longer and they keep my hunger levels down. Um, if I'm in a really restricted caloric diet, like say I'm dieting for a show or something, and I'm eating 150 grams of carbs, I'm eating 5 meals of 30 grams of carbs or so, let's say, I'd prefer to have them from potatoes instead of rice, um, because the potatoes are going to keep me feeling less hungry throughout the day. But if it's in like an off-season phase where I'm trying to put size on and I'm eating 500 to 600 grams of carbs a day, um, like I said earlier, I can't have potatoes because they sit in my stomach too long and they make me full, so I need to eat the rice. Um, the different types of potatoes, there's white potatoes, russet potatoes, sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are like one of the best carbohydrates that you can eat. They're okay to me. I don't really eat them that often. I probably should be eating them more. But I'm just a big fan of the rice, and I don't really enjoy sweet potatoes too terribly much. But if you like sweet potatoes, stick with sweet potatoes. They have a very low glycemic index. They digest very slowly. They're going to keep your blood sugar extremely stable. They're going to keep you full for a long time, so you're not hungry 2 hours after you eat. Um, yeah, sweet potatoes are great. I'm just not a fan personally. Oats. I really like oats. They digest really slow. They're also super cheap. You can buy like big containers of them for like $2 at Walmart or something like that. They're ridiculously cheap. Um, Similar to potatoes, though, they tend to sit in the stomach quite a bit longer and keep you feeling less full or less hungry, I should say. So oats and potatoes are kind of there in the same region. The oats just digest a bit slower, but they're going to sit and they're going to make you feel full for a long period of time. Bananas. Um, Talked about bananas when I was talking about fructose. And for me, if I had to pick one source of fructose, it would be a banana. Um, Bananas are, one, they taste really freaking great. Bananas are also really high in potassium, which is a mineral that a lot of athletes can benefit from, especially ones that sweat a lot. Potassium levels tend to decrease because potassium is an electrolyte. So when you sweat a lot, you tend to lose potassium, which can lead to cramping. And anyone who's ever played football or basketball and has gotten a cramp or something knows that that obviously sucks. Anybody in the gym too, you get a cramp or something, that obviously sucks. So I'm a big fan of bananas. They're also really versatile. You can throw bananas in the freezer and freeze them and throw them in shakes and smoothies when it'll add like thickness and taste to your shake and also get your fructose in. Um, I also like blueberries for fructose, but if I had to pick one, it really would be bananas. I think that bananas are probably the king of fruit, at least from an athlete's perspective. And then the simple sugars. I said when I talked about simple sugars that I do think that simple sugars have a place in an athlete's diet, specifically in the post-workout window, or even the intra-workout window. Intra-workout meaning during the workout. There are a lot of carb powders that you can buy: dextrose, maltodextrin, highly branched cyclic dextrin, Vitargo, Carbolin, all these things. These are all they're all the same essentially. They're all simple sugar powders, and like when we talked about the simple sugars, we talked about the fact that they spike your insulin really high, which is exactly what you want post workout. Post workout, again, you just put the muscles through some metabolic stresses. They need to get amino acids and glucose into them as soon as possible. So the best way to do that is to spike your insulin. And if you have one form of carbohydrate that spikes your insulin higher than the other, that time is exactly the best time to be eating sugars, essentially. If you see me in my gym or you see me on Instagram or everything, my post workout, I'm always eating like bananas, or I'm eating like candy, like sweet tarts, Skittles, um, Gatorade, dextrose powder, highly branched cyclic dextrin powder. I'm always eating some sort of simple carbohydrate post workout, candy. I'm always eating that kind of stuff post workout because that's the best time that you should be eating that. Because by eating the refined carbs, the simple sugars, what you're doing is you're spiking your insulin very high and getting the glucose and the amino acids into the muscle cells as quickly as possible. The quicker you get them in there, the faster you're going to recover. The faster you recover, the faster you're going to grow. And obviously, everyone wins in that situation. Again, to reiterate about the simple sugars, if you're just like a normal person, you probably shouldn't be eating simple sugars. They're in the best interest for athletes, physique athletes, specifically in the post-workout setting. All right, guys. Hopefully, you're not too overwhelmed with all that stuff about carbohydrates. I know it's a pretty long video. It looks like 38 and a half minutes so far. Hopefully, you take the time to watch it all and learn something new and learn how to apply these things into your diet, especially if you're an athlete or a bodybuilder or something. Again, if you're interested in coaching, my link is always going to be in the description to my email. Just send me an email, and if I got room, then we'll get started. But as far as that, watch out for the next video. It's going to be all about fats. It's going to be a very similar structure to this one, where I talk about their basic structure and what they do and what to look for and the different kinds and what I recommend, etc. And protein's going to be the same way. So yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Take it easy.